Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about chip clearance, bulk density, and why sometimes your chainsaw can bog down. Number of reasons. Reason could be that you're putting pressure on the back of the handle of your chainsaw using the spikes and it's digging into the timber and the RPM starts to drop down and then it starts to bog down. That's one reason. Another reason is, especially if you've got a really good sharp chain and the rakers are all set at the right height and everything, is that it's cutting really well and the chips have to be able to get out. Now, would you believe these chips that you see here, and there's quite a lot of chips here, is from a small log of 102 millimeters on an 050 chain, which has a kerf of about 5.5 millimeters. That is a lot of chips, people. So much so that if you look at the bulk density of it, it's equal to this solid piece. Because that's what I actually did. I weighed this 78 grams and the kerf cut 78 grams of timber out of the wood. That's how much grams come out. So the bulk density is anywhere between 5 and 10 times more. So what that actually means is this, that if we look at the density of hardwood, so this is Australian hardwood, yellow gum, it's extremely high density. It's 1.2 tons per cubic metre. So probably you don't get much more than that. Now that's with moisture in it, so that's green wood. When it dries out, you've probably got about 10% extra moisture in there, so that's probably got about 21%. That'll lose about another 10% of water in there, so you'll have a density of about 1,100 kilos. Now, bulk density is a totally different equation, and what that means is the amount of volume that this takes up. Even though they both weigh the same, the volume of this can be anywhere between 5 and 10 times more. So, even though it's a very small diameter log of 102 millimeters, an enormous amount of sawdust is there. And that's all got to get out past the chain as it exits down near the sprocket. And a lot of the times if you sort of pull the back of the handle with the dog spikes in, it can bog down. It can bog down, as I said, for two reasons. Not enough horsepower, and the chips are starting to bind up and all jam. Now, would you believe that this chain can outperform a brand new chain? There's virtually nothing left on it. All right, so when you look at this chain, you go, oh my God, have a look at this little triangle. But what this chain has over a brand new chain is on every tooth, roughly a tooth is about 10 millimeters long. These teeth are only about 3 millimeters. So all that metal has been removed. So you've got all this free volume in here where all the sawdust can fit now as the chain's spinning around, between 9 and 10,000 RPM while it's sawing the timber. So it's like a little bit of a racing chain. So one of the things that I like to do is to keep an old chain, especially when it gets half worn down, I really like to keep them aside so that if I've got some big logs that I want to cut, I prefer to use a chain that's half worn down, even a little bit more than half worn down, because the chip clearance is much better on a worn chain. Plus the teeth are a little bit smaller, so it acts as a narrow kerf. And what I mean by that is that a chainsaw tooth is tapered. So the kerf is narrower down here than what it is here. So therefore, it actually works as a narrow kerf chain when it gets down to end of life. And that's why this bloody cut's fantastic. I've retired the chain now, but I like to keep it for demonstration purposes and show people. And we'll just zoom in there for those that really haven't had their chains worn down that far. Believe me, this cuts like you wouldn't believe. Not much left of it, is there? So what we'll do is I'm going to go out and cut a few more of these. Take these little pieces off here and collect the sawdust and weigh it, and it will just show you the difference between what something solid is and how much sawdust can come from my Ryobi saw on 050 gauge semi-chisel, and the kerf is 5.5 millimeters wide. So we're going to do a cut approximately 105 millimeters in diameter, and the total width of the left and the right tooth is 5.5 millimeters. Yeah, so when we talk about chip clearance, this little log here that I cut, it put out 78 grams of sawdust. Hard to believe, but we're going to do it again and weigh them all. So as you can see, there's no sawdust there, and we're going to do a little cut right here, and we'll see how many grams we get out of this lot. I'll just get my foot out of the way so I get the foot full of sawdust. Right, what I'll do is fold that up, we'll weigh that. Okay, so we saw that little video, it was only very brief, and it showed that we had 78 grams of sawdust. And we done that a few times, and we had variations anywhere from, 75 grams, 80 grams, a little bit of variation here and there. Anyway, we took this piece here, and this piece here, because we've done about half a dozen cuts, and we collected quite a few samples. This weighs 70 grams, and the sawdust weighs 70 grams. And look at the difference of the bulk density. So, I was talking about bulk density before, and that's the difference. It's about 5 times, something like that there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the bulk density of this is about 5 times. So therefore, if you had a cubic metre of this, it would weigh about 1.2 tonnes. If you had a cubic metre of the sawdust, it will vary between 100 and 200 kilograms per cubic metre. So the yellow box, which is this timber here, its obviously density is fairly high, and that's that's how you actually look at the density of wood. If you're doing Pinus radiata, it's got a density of about 500 kilograms per cubic metre. So chip clearance really starts to come into the equation because you've got thousands of chips per minute, thousands and thousands of them. And if they clog up the kerf, then the saw can bog down, and especially if it's wet and it's sticky. This type of timber, it's got a moisture, this had a moisture content of around about 20%. It varies from the middle to the outside. It's a lot wetter on the outside than it is in the middle. And there's very little sap or resin that's in there, compared to, say, Pinus radiata, which will weep out resin, is very sticky, and it can bind up and cause cut-in problems. So chip clearance is a big issue. The smaller the saw, sometimes it can be more problematic, like MS-170s, MS-180s, all those small saws with 3/8 low profile. Not a lot of room for chip clearance, and that's why they're only very small saws, and they're much slower at cutting when you're cutting wood. An example would be if I had an MS-311 and I had an MS-180. I had a 16-inch bar on the MS-180 and a 20-inch bar on the MS-311, and I got a log, and it's 1 foot in diameter. So the MS-180 with a 16-inch bar, it's going to cut very slow through there, so it's got plenty of time for chip clearance. The MS-311 with a 20-inch bar is going to cut through a lot faster. And if I had an MS-660 on there, I could put a little bit more pressure on it, and because I got the horsepower, it won't bog down and it will cut through faster. If I put a 404 chain on, and it's only on a 20-inch, I've got an enormous amount of chip clearance. And then if I went to a 404 skip chain, I've even got more clearance. So chip clearance is a major thing. And if you look at the racing saws, and we'll actually put one up there, right? This is an absolute awesome racing chainsaw. Honda 500, two-stroke. With all expansion chamber, special carburetor, you're looking at about 70 horsepower. Absolutely unbelievable. Chain speed, about 200 mile an hour. 17 tooth sprocket on it. Probably revving about 20,000 RPM, or could even be slightly more. It's look, it's huge. You'll notice if you have a look at the saw, you'll notice that there's no guard over the sprocket, so chip clearance isn't a problem, and it's got about a 17 or an 18 tooth sprocket on there. It'll be 404 chain, high top, if you can. They don't make high top anymore. We'll just put a picture of 404 high top on there. You have a look at that, you can understand the reason that the tooth is so high, so there's a lot of room for chip clearance. These are very sought after chains. Those chains actually last quite a long time. They could last 5 or 6 years, because in a competition, you're not doing a competition every week and there's only 3 cuts, down, up, down. That's it. So they last a long time if you look after them. Now, what you've got to be careful of, you want to make sure that one of those chains don't explode. Doing 200 mile an hour would be a dangerous weapon. So chip clearance is much more critical than what you may think it is. And sometimes when your saw bogs down, it may not be because it doesn't have enough. Well, it can bog down for a number of reasons. Probably the most common reason is that you're putting a little bit of pressure on the saw and it doesn't have enough horsepower to pull the chain at that high RPM, so it tends to bog down. And then the user releases a little bit of pressure and the saw speeds back up again. So you're not meant to put much pressure on the saw. So that's probably the most reason that bogs down. The second reason that a chainsaw can bog down is poor chip clearance. So you got the saw, you're cutting away, the length of the bar is just about halfway through the log. The chips are coming out everywhere. If there's too much water in the log, that's bad. And if there's too much sap in the wood, the combination of both makes it very, very difficult. It becomes sticky, all right? And that requires more horsepower to pull that through. The chips are all sticky and they're not being evacuated efficiently as what they normally would. And in that situation, you can find out that it's difficult to get excellent chip evacuation, and it can bog down the saw. One of the things that I generally do, and it works out quite well, let's just say it's firewood collecting season, and we drop a tree, and I cut them up in 4-foot lengths. Generally, you find out, well, if I lived on a farm and I could cut down some trees, if you left them there for a couple of weeks, you find out that a little bit of moisture evaporates out, and it's a lot easier to cut the tree into smaller pieces, firewood pieces. So yeah, look, it's just interesting. Chip clearance is one of those things that is much more important than what you think it may be. And I've even had it that bad that the chips jammed up on the nose of the chainsaw and stalled the saw. So then you've got to loosen the bar off and pull the chain out and use your bar clearing tool and pull all the chips out. So it does happen. And another hard palm tree is probably the worst thing you want to cut down. That'll just clog your saw right up. So yeah, chip clearance is much more critical than what a lot of people think. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.